Hello everyone. Tonight we're going to be reading pages 258 to 265 in the memory unit, and we'll jump right in with some key vocabulary terms that you're going to be responsible for. To begin, we want to talk about parallel processing. Your chapter talks about this at all times, like we mentioned in class. You are going to process information both automatically and effortfully. So automatically, like we mentioned in class on the first day, is things like what you ate for dinner last night, what you ate for breakfast. It's stuff that happens without you even having to think about it. You're going to remember it. You're not probably not going to remember it for long, but it happens automatically. In addition to that, things that we're trying to remember require effortful process. So for instance, these vocabulary words that you're talking about right now, this is require effortful processing. And our brain simultaneously, it's this mega computer, simultaneously does both these things at the same time. So even while you're studying right now, if you hear your mom yelling at you in the other room to come see her, your brain is able to pay attention to what you're doing now, but also hear her at the same time and divide that attention. So it does it at the same exact time. Along with these types of processing are a few keywords here. Rehearsal. Rehearsal is important because in order to process the information and encode it, which we talk about in a little bit, to encode it, you have to rehearse it. And so you have to rehearse, and you have to rehearse it a lot. The more you rehearse something, the better you're going to recall it. That's just the way it is. So you need to rehearse things, and you need to rehearse them without looking at them. Real rehearsal occurs when you're able to recall something from without any prompts to you. That's when you really know you've learned it. Another vocabulary word is the spacing effect. This is what we talked about. Maybe we didn't mention it in class, but the spacing effect has to do with your processing works better when you have a space in between the time that you first learned something. If you, one second. When you take something and study it over shorter chunks of time. So if I had 2 hours to study total, I said you can study for 2 hours. And some students study 2 hours the night before the exam. Other students take those 2 hours and then divide them up 8 15-minute sections. Usually, the people that study the 8 15-minute sections over a space of time are going to perform better over the long term. They're going to remember that stuff better over the long term. And that's important for this class, right? Because you have the final exam, you have a midterm, and you also have the AP exam. You need to remember this information for the entire semester. So the spacing effect's very big. Cramming, which is what we all love to do, cramming does work if the test is immediately following. But cramming does not work at keeping that information in your brain for a longer period of time. So if you cram the night before a test, it is going to improve your grade a little bit. It's going to work a little bit. Is it going to work anywhere near as well as spacing that information out? No. Is it going to work anywhere near as well for your long-term retention? Absolutely not. It's going to be horrible for your long-term retention. You won't remember anything. And so this rehearsal over and over again combined with spacing that information out is super important. Serial positioning effect we talked about in class the first day. That's primacy and recency. Remember primacy, primary, first. So this is when you remember the things first. Recency, recent, most recent is the latest thing. This is when you remember the things, the most latest, most easily. Remember these two things the most easily. And I put spacing effect. Again, good for me. Von Restorff Effect. This is interesting. This serial positioning effect, I told you that you forget the things in the middle. Well, if I were to ask you, and we do this in class, the presidents of the United States, a lot of you remember number 16, which is Abraham Lincoln, because Abraham Lincoln stood out as an anomaly. If you have something that's strange or different or unique, then you're liable to remember those. If you're meeting a group of 20 people and the 11th guy you meet happens to be a midget, for instance, and you're with normal sized people, you're going to remember that midget because he's unique or she's unique. That's the von Restorff effect. This isn't in your text, so I put it in the blue box, but it's something that could show up on the AP exam. Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, and actually in the text we talk about the Ebbinghaus retention curve. Forgetting curve is another thing. In your text it's retention. There is an Ebbinghaus forgetting curve as well, but the text for this unit is the Ebbinghaus retention curve, and it just basically says that the longer you practice something, the better you're going to remember it the next day. It's pretty straightforward. If you practice something 5 times versus something 20 times, the person who practices it 20 times is going to remember it better the next day. It's pretty simple and straightforward, but it's never been scientifically shown or proven before. So this guy, Hermann Ebbinghaus, which is an important name, one of the names that I mentioned yesterday that you should know, discovered or legitimized by scientifically showing it. Finally, we've got some more different types of encoding. You have visual, acoustic, and semantic. Visual encoding is when you see something. So if you see me doing something in front of the class, that's visual encoding. Visual encoding is usually the least effective way to remember something. Acoustic encoding, hearing something, is the second best, and semantic encoding is by far the best way to remember something. It blows everything else out of the water. It is so visual encoding. If you just read the book, that's visual encoding. If you read the book and talk about what you read, that's visual and acoustic. If you read the book, talk about what it says, and then what we've talked about in class, apply some sort of meaning to it, to your life, try to connect it to your life, which is called the self-reference effect. Again, this isn't in the book. The self-reference effect. If you apply it to yourself, you are much more likely to remember it. So we try to do that with everything. That's what that stuff in orange is in your book when you're taking notes, is to self-reference. Self-referencing it, giving it some meaning. Semantic means meaning. Giving it some meaning will make it so much more memorable to you, and you're going to be able to recall that. A mnemonic is a device to memory learning trick. Chunking is when we take information and break it up into smaller parts. Your phone number, for instance, is chunked. It's 559-595, and then the number to the school is 7220, right? We have that into 3 separate chunks. So we're really, when our brain's processing it, it's just really remembering 3 pieces of information, not 10 digits. 3 pieces of information. So chunking is a way to remember things better. And then hierarchy, that's what you're doing while you're taking notes right now. You're creating a hierarchy. You've got a list with subsections, and a hierarchy is also another great way to remember things. So this is just some keys vocabulary for the unit, and that is about all I have for you today. Do your reading, make sure you get your conclusion in, and we'll see you all in class.